This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. And if you could, please do me a favor and take a moment and leave a rating and review in whatever podcast player you're listening to this on, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, doesn't matter. I would greatly appreciate it. And that feedback really helps get other listeners to the show. Also, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you feel so inclined, you can go to geekleader.com/tip and donate to the show. Thanks so much. All right, Geek Leaders, today I'm honored to have Scott Alldrige on the show. He is a cybersecurity expert, and he's the CEO of a company called IP Services, and he's the author of a book, which we're going to talk a lot about today, called the VisbleOps Cybersecurity, where it's all about enhancing cybersecurity with a posture of practical guidance. And I assume we're going to get into things that teach us as other general IT leaders, the things that we need to know about when it comes to cybersecurity and what's happening today in the world of cyber. Anyway, with all that being said, Scott, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John.
If you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about your background, how you got into cybersecurity in general, and why you decided to write a book.
Yeah, happy to jump into that. First, I want to say I'm a fan of the Geek Leader podcast. You're doing some great stuff, and enjoy listening to the episodes. And I don't know, whoever's listening today, go like, follow, and encourage it, because I think we need more of the type of stuff that you're bringing out there to the awareness around IT and cybersecurity and so forth. So many subjects, but anyway, just one of them.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate the plug.
Yeah, 5 stars. Anyway, I'm a little bit of one of those, teeny entrepreneur guys. When I was 19, opened my first kind of software business, and was kind of high school, kind of a closet geek, because I'm aging myself, but back then it wasn't quite as cool to be up on computers. And so I had, the Commodore 64 in the closet I'd pull out.
I had one of those too.
So yeah, that was kind of the thing growing up. And then of course, I was into sports and stuff, but had an injury, and I thought, okay, I had an opportunity to go into a software business. And so we were doing software retail back literally in 1989. And started, selling some computers and different things, then doing some small software development projects for some smaller business application type stuff. And then we started doing some networking, dating myself, but back to Lantastic and Novell and, that kind of stuff. And decided we wanted to get into network integration because we were getting some larger, more regional kind of clients out here in the Northwest. And so kind of partnered up with a company called MicroAge Inc., which was a Fortune 500 based out of Tempe, Arizona, and acquisitioned one of the locations. And we eventually launched 4 locations out here in the Northwest, and had 120, 30 people running around, standing up all kinds of different networks and doing different support. And we did a lot of IT security back then. Of course, we didn't call it cybersecurity.
Right.
And interestingly enough, as we built some fairly big stuff, we actually built out kind of using the AT&T network, but kind of an e-business solution in partnership with a company that owned about 80% of the real estate lockbox industry. So they had like 600,000 realtors across the U.S. using what they called a little dumb key that you could plug in and unlock a code, and it was the new, latest, greatest thing, rather than the
Kind of like the predecessor to YubiKey or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so putting it, and they were starting to collect some data, and of course, then it evolved to the Palm, and now, of course, it's been Bluetooth off your iPhone forever. But anyway, we were bold early on, setting up some e-business and some large, actually a couple of data centers. One was AT&T's, Redwood City, California. Data centers were not a big thing; they were just coming on. You did not have a lot of MSP type stuff. Managed service providers out there was kind of rare. But they asked us, since we built out some stuff along with a couple other customers, will we manage it ongoing? And got to thinking, man, that's a pretty good business model. We provide a set deliverable of services. We have some of the expertise. And so we'll, do that on a monthly basis. And voila, we entered into the MSP space. I joke we were doing MSP way before MSP was cool. And now, everybody and their dog and their frog seems to have some version of a managed service practice. But obviously, that launched us into, we cherry picked our top, 5 guys from the MicroAge business. And really that was dubbed our advanced networking group. And what we started to do was some early monitoring tools and stuff. And my guys, the 2 or 3 of them really cared a lot about the way things were configured and documenting how we, made changes in the network, that kind of stuff. We found that very interesting. And we actually partnered up with one of our clients, Tripwire Software, and my CTO and the CTO then Gene Cam, and they basically became kind of buddies talking about a lot of the same things. And the big query was, what really are best practices in IT? We're talking I'm up into 1994, 5, and 6 now. We're really 6, 7, and 8. Started the conversation, and then I'm sorry, it was the early 2000s. That's when we migrated over. I'm sorry to migrate. So it's early 2000s. I'm talking 2002, 3, and 4. But basically, the idea was, what is, Mike does it one way, Sarah's doing it another way. What truly is the best way? And so some of those conversations led to kind of looking at different frameworks. There was old frameworks that were more accounting based, like COBIT and COSO and some of those kinds of things. But there was this new thing kind of built off the BS 15,000, which was a British standard that had some IT stuff in it. Imagine that, the British with some of those standards. And they were launching kind of this loose body of work called the IT Infrastructure Library, ITIL. You could Google it back then, you wouldn't find anything, but now type in ITIL and you'll see, iterations beyond iterations and services and training, and it's obviously prolific. So we kind of launched on that, like, okay, and they were releasing this 2.0, ITIL 2 was coming out. We were about 3 months ahead of time. We ordered it. It showed up on a cold December morning in our conference room. UPS guy drops this huge box. We're all excited because we think this is going to be the answer to, bringing a lot of the best practices that we think are not only needed, but we were following at the time, and bring it together. And so it rips open. It's literally like 11 books, and it reads like the telephone book. I mean, it's the process of the process of the process. And we're like, how on earth would you start to make sense of this, or, make it applicable? And we were impressed that it actually gave great definition. So there's at least a common parlance when I say, release management, and you say change management. We know what we're talking about in relation to the practices of IT and IT service management. It introduced this idea of IT service management really in two particular sections. The first section is called service support. The other section is service delivery. And we kind of camped in the service support as an MSP, right? Incident management, problem, change, release, config, really important, processes for us to follow. And so we kind of started doing some roundtables with some interesting companies like United Airlines and Bear Stearns and the New York Stock Exchange in partnership. And what we really found out that there really are some best practices we could glean from how they did things. Now we did things as IP services, but also, kind of commonly understood. And then with ITIL putting, kind of some framework around it, it really made a lot of sense. So we launched into writing the VisibleOps methodology. And that book became wildly popular. The intellectual property was spun to the IT Process Institute, which I was one of the co-founders. And so we took that body and released the little yellow book. It looked like Cliff Notes. That little book sold about 250 or 80,000 copies, just hugely popular. And the who's using it around the globe, quite frankly, is an early onset methodology for using ITIL or IT service management, those kinds of things. So that's kind of where we did it. But a lot of those things really applied to security. And one of the reasons that we really got behind it, the science at the time, we started talking about managing by fact and not by belief, like IT likes to do, right? I mean, some of those early IT days, it's like, Bob from the manufacturing floor bumped into the CEO's computer, and it started working that the CEO's been complaining about forever. And all of a sudden we find out Bob's the IT director. That's kind of the world we lived in. And so anyway, to make a long story short, I'm rambling on a little bit about this history because it's really important. Is that the IT infrastructure library, is really the foundational, married to VisibleOps, and that's the living, breathing part of what we are. And some of those foundational facts were 70 to 84% of all IT failure. This was way back in the 2000s in the original studies. I continue to this day see studies that still prove this to great percentages. But all IT downtime failure, lack of availability, is correlated to some unapproved, unauthorized, untested change. So the idea became, the working thesis. Let's just do a really good job with change management, and we're going to knock a home run out of availability. Well, that simple question, oversimplifying it, how do you do really good change management? Well, first you start with configuration management. You can't control what you can't measure. You can't manage what you don't know what you have, right? So we have to know that we've got good, secure, well-working, well-defined configuration management. That's a big process in ITIL. It's a big part of what we do. Without getting a bunch of ITIL terms, there's some sub processes that you follow to do that, like a change management configuration database, a CMDB. But then once you know your configuration, as we're introducing change, we need to make sure we're following good release management practices. And this is where we kind of get into DevOps before DevOps was cool. High rates of, introducing high rates of change at high success rates partly comes to really good testing and UAT and all those good things that you would do in good release management practices, rollback. And then as we introduce change, are we classifying change, right? Is this a pre-approved change or is this a significant change? So we need to get all the stakeholders. We need to have a forward schedule of change or a maintenance window. We need to have the CAB, the change advisory board involved, all of those good kind of things. But I'll get to the punchline, and that will set us up for the next thing I want to just chat about real quick, is that the punchline is that, and it's a bit of a riddle, is that not only those studies prove that, but also no security breach ever happens without a change or a need for a change. So either I hack into something and change something in order to do the bad threat actor stuff they do, or I convince you, right, socially engineer you that there's a need for this change. So those are very relevant to cybersecurity. So really the ongoing philosophical position is that, really good IT processes are really the ultimate backstop to great security and cybersecurity. Knowing your configurations, are they patched, all that kind of, it all plays into it, which is what led to why we wrote the book. We actually released a series of books. We did another one called the VisbleOps Security Book. Then we did the VisbleOps Private Cloud. And then just recently, earlier this year, I released the VisbleOps Cybersecurity Book, and actually wrote an executive edition because it's fairly technical, and I might offer up your audience a little later on something on that. But that's kind of where the cybersecurity went. We at IP Services, of course, have been delivering services for over 20 years. A lot of managed services and a lot of security services. About 10 years ago, we started leading with cybersecurity. Because really it applies to everything, how you're managing all of your systems and applications and people, et cetera. So it's a really big part, but that's really what led to the book. I have been in this space a long time. As I've shared, I've dated myself. I do have multiple certifications, both on the technical and on the, just IT leadership side. I am an MBA in cybersecurity. So yeah, I've been camped in this world a long time, and really excited about my book, and it's now an Amazon bestseller, the VisbleOps Cybersecurity. So excited about the momentum that it's having right now. John, if I didn't talk enough or fast enough or give you enough information to start out with, you just let me know.
No, I think that was perfect. I have a lot of questions. So I just want to slowly get into these because our audience is very kind of diverse when it comes to the technology field, whether it be software engineers, whether it be, cybersecurity engineers or help desk folks. We're all over the board. And I want to talk a little bit about the difference between change management and configuration management.
Sure.
Because in the different worlds, they mean different things. It could be like version control when you're writing software versus like, pushing things to production or doing your Windows patching if you're on the help desk side. How would you describe the two and what the differences are between those?
Sure. So, change management, in terms of really is the management of anything that's going to be introduced to the environment, right? The goal of change management is to make any change with success, not having to roll back, not having to take any systems down, right? Obviously, a fully successful rolled out change. I mean, that's the goal. Release changes at a high rate of success without rollback. And configuration management. And when we get to change management, I went there a little bit, right? We're going to classify change. There's some kind of core processes and things that we want to do as we're managing change. And it starts with that. But then it actually gets a little deeper as we get into, how are we actually going to introduce the change? How do we evaluate the impact of the change? I mean, there's a lot of analysis that needs to go on. It's not just making a change. And a lot of times there's pressure from the business. We got to get things done. We got to get a roll. I know a lot in software dev or in a DevOps world, that can be challenging as well. The tools of the last, 10 years have gotten so much better, Puppet and Chef and some of those things. And I don't camp in a development world. I camp in production operations, but obviously have worked a lot and integrated a lot with the development world. But change management, I think, is, a really foundational piece because we know, as the stats prove, right, that it really will cause downtime or interruption or lack of availability, that kind of thing, right? We know how many times as somebody under that pressure to business, quickly made a change. They checked a couple things because everybody's hopefully pretty smart and, and it all looks good. We roll it and we run out that Friday night to, Johnny's birthday party. We're running late. And the Monday morning, the CEO is ticked because we learned that, some critical system went down or is not available. And some unthinkable little thing happened because it wasn't properly planned. It wasn't properly tested. All of those good basic foundational practices. In configuration management, what really the CMDB configuration management database, we really need to classify everything as a CI, as the kind of the ITIL speak, which it means for a configuration item. And this database is relational. So we can correlate, what any particular CI that is in there to whatever maintenance contract or maybe ticket history, or we can do all kinds of cool things if we have a database. And we also know what underpinning systems or dependencies that are related to it. That's super important in configuration. Also maintenance contracts, revision of updates on the OSs. There's just a lot of information that's kept there. And also your CMDB usually works with a DSL, a definitive software library, which is usually a place where those golden images all live and aren't touched. And there are certainly put under its own change management. So those two are really important, how they kind of work and play off of each other. In a DevOps world, again, a lot of the tooling is a little different than it would be the production operations world, but they are similar. They do cross.
Yeah, the concept's still the same, right? It sounds like it's just a how you deploy it, and maybe even the speed of deployment's a little bit different too.
Absolutely.
Tell me a little bit about like ZeroTrust and how that comes into play with these tools we're talking about with the CMDB and things like that. And
sure.
And what is ZeroTrust for starters? Let's just start with that.
Yeah, that's great. So ZeroTrust is a buzzword, quite frankly. And the first caution is that, we're hearing about, buy this connectivity because it's ZeroTrust or ZeroTrust in a box. There's no such thing. ZeroTrust is just simply a methodology, and to some degree a philosophy of how you're going to address cybersecurity and security in your organization, particularly IT security and system security. And so ZeroTrust is not the concept in and of itself really isn't that new. It's least privilege. We've known about least privilege for years and building out ADs and who gets access to what. And right, we're only giving access to the minimal information or resources or whatever directories, information, data that we absolutely need to give somebody to lock it down. No different than the old, accounting systems. You're in AP, you've got some kind of enterprise accounting system. You got AP department. They only need to touch AP and all the things that are related to AP. They don't need to be touching the production network. They don't need to be doing or logging in as an accountant that's touching the general ledger. Mm-hmm. So this least privilege concept, right, is really the core of ZeroTrust. And the idea is taking that all the way out to the edge. And of course, we know that the new edge of the network is not a device, it's the end user. And we also know that 80% of all breaches start right there. So that's that general concept of philosophy of ZeroTrust. And one of the principles that it starts with is assume breach. And I could camp on this for a little bit, but I'll try to make it brief.
So you basically assume breach. That sounds like you're assuming that there's already a vulnerability that's been exploited.
Yep. Or both, right? We assume that we've been breached and it just hasn't been acted upon by the threat actor, or we actually are going to assume that at some point the inevitable is going to happen. Mm-hmm. And the evidence of that's pretty simple. I mean, look at some of these massive enterprise organizations, right? All of the tools, the latest, the greatest. They've got the, $500,000 a year, cybersecurity architect guy. They've got, all the things that they would need to be the best defenses. And yet we still see them getting breached. So I think that the forethought is if they're going to breach it, they intend to breach you, they will find a way. You will get breached. They'll eventually get to a user somehow. And again, I could name examples of that, all the way from, the casino breaches to, whatever it is. We've seen so much of it, some of the hospital breaches, even some of the big ones that have done well with their security, following a lot of best practices. So the idea is assume breach. So what's the answer there? Well, a couple of things. One is if we're in assume breach, we start with backups, which is way overtaken for granted these days. Everybody thinks they have it under control, and we've got some cool tool that's, Zerto, we're streamed out to the cloud, we're good. They told us it was encrypted, whatever. But it's not good enough to just have backup and validate that it's a backup. And maybe it's encrypted, maybe it's not, maybe some of it is, some of it isn't. Do we know everything about it in terms of, how it's being backed up, validating that it's been scanned and cleaned for any malware or any ransomware? And then ultimately, not just encrypted, but actually immutable, meaning that it's non-touchable. It's completely separate from your network. And then, of course, and we call that air gapped as well. So it's complete. So that way the threat actor gets in there. He can ransom your local stuff. He can't, a lot of times I'll sit, watch where it's going, then they'll go encrypt it in the cloud or wherever you're backing it up, another location, whatever it might be. This is their tactic. And they're patient. They'll sit for 3, 4, 5 months to find out where and how they can go. So they got you. You walk in that day, all the screens are dead. You got the note. You need to pay X and ransomware to this particular crypto account. We've got the keys to your system. And everybody, a lot of times, are like, neener, and then they go to their backup because they think they got it covered to find out that their backup is actually also encrypted. There's another little file in the primary directory telling them the same, the text file telling them the same thing. So this is what we see happen out there in the marketplace, and it's fairly frequent in the business place. So the point to that is that not just having good backups and validated they're good backups, but making sure they truly are immutable and air gapped. And then the question becomes RPO, RTO, pretty common terms. At what point in time do we want to recover to, right? Do we snapshot 4 hours? Do we snapshot a day, 2 days? Where and how, what's our iterations of those backups that we can restore to? And so that becomes a really critical piece. And then, of course, the time objective. How fast can we restore, and where are we going to restore it if it's not directly reachable to our network? So these are things that we kind of start with in the whole world of zero trust.
Right.
And then really it gets into 7 pillars as we go to we kind of look deeper into zero trust in terms of how you actually, work with zero trust. And those particular pillars, go all the way from, network controls and access to identity and access management, and on we go. So that's where I get to a little bit of my book. In the book that I wrote, I kind of start with a chapter on leadership, because it really does start with leadership. Like a lot of things, this security first mindset has to be there. We are now seeing finally some demand, and rightfully so, and waking up a little in the boardroom where they're wanting to get the right cyber. I sit on a couple of boards now that as a cyber expert, because we need to have visibility at that layer, and the C-suite needs to understand how critical. You don't have to read the news too much, but it's surprising how many people still see spending money on cybersecurity is like buying life insurance for a 20-year-old. They just don't think it's really ever going to happen to them, and they're kind of blind to it. So we talk about leadership a lot. It starts there. Then I talk about philosophy in the second chapter, which gets into, do you really believe in best practices? I talk a little bit about the things that matter in terms of people first. There's a lot of things, how that fits. So the philosophical position is important. That really sets up, caring about IT processes. And then ultimately, I talk a little bit about a fool with the tool is still a fool. So we don't just rely on tools. And then the third chapter is the efficacy of IT processes, where I go into the historical stuff that I just shared earlier with you in this podcast. Is that, do these things matter, and why do they matter? So a lot of the stuff that I shared. Then I get into the zero trust stuff a little bit more, verified credential access versus just regular MFA that hijackers are siphoning off all the time. They're injecting things and taking MFA passwords if it's not decentralized. You need to have 2 points of authentication. And so, the authenticator app to an actual, authentication point that's SEP, and letting the crypto, keys talk to each other to know that you're continually being verified. So anyway, I could go on a little bit, but that's generally kind of the zero trust, general concept of what I get into in the book, and talk about some specific methodologies.
Okay, let's back up a little bit and talk a little bit about the leadership aspect, because that's always been like for me, it's been one of the harder nuts to crack when it comes to getting buy-in from the top on cybersecurity. I actually was on a board one time, and they brought me in because this was not a technical company, but they brought me in because they said they needed somebody with a technical mindset, on the board. And I was the only technical person on the board. And, immediately I went into talking about well, why don't you have MFA, for all your employees? And this was many years ago, before Microsoft and Authenticator made it really easy. But we brought up those things, and their whole thing was, well, that's not convenient. That's expensive. It slows us down. Speed to market's more important, and I kept getting all those things. So what is it that you talk about when it comes to the leadership and getting leaders on board?
Yeah. Great question. I think number one is just actually getting your leadership to believe or understand that cybersecurity is a leadership issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's no longer, it's a business issue. It's a business problem, threat, risk, and understanding that risk. It's not an IT problem. That's for the, brainy guys down there, the ones that, are the propeller guys, or the ones that we, shove the pizza box in and we never open the door. That's kind of been the mentality a little bit, kind of discounting the reality and the, criticality of your, IT and security team. So that's number one. So we got to align, right? We got to align. And I talk about this in the book, really our leadership goals with the business objectives. They've got to be aligned. And that means both sides sometimes have to have some give and take. You know, sometimes IT and security is a little bit the sky is falling mentality, the little boy that cried wolf about everything. And so sometimes that, heightened awareness to security can start to overreact to threats and risks rather than being analytical. Mm-hmm. So I would say to the more, cyber tech teams, be really analytical to make your case, understand why and how it really matters to the business. And honestly, what is the true risk level of this? That's really important. So anyway, that's the idea. So they got to own the risk right at the top. So we got to communicate about it. We got to talk about it. Awareness is kind of happening. Nobody has to create FUD or fear, uncertainty, and doubt anymore. You just got to read the news. I mean, about every day you can plug in some kind of a breach. And we all know that. I think the last stat I read is that, they estimate about 23% of all breaches are reported. So for every two, there's 8 that are not reported. Because they have to, and then the states are coming up with better laws for reporting, but they still don't because a lot of them are private companies and they don't really have to. So anyway, culture. So then it becomes a matter of culture. Can you get the leaders to, set the tone by modeling security? Do they care enough that the CEO would even put in his newsletter or have a team meeting that he would get involved in with various groups, downstream to let them know this is important to him. He doesn't want to be the next headline. We value it. And then, of course, with that awareness of the board and the leadership and IT making it an appropriate, appeal and awareness to the team, then you got to see budget follow because that often is a challenge, right? They do what you alluded to earlier. They don't want to budget until we really get the understanding of what the risk is. So putting it in financial terms, I think is really important. We also know that the last thing I heard is that around 40% of businesses that suffer a serious breach in the small to medium sector, not the enterprise, they seem to be surviving somehow. Side note, I have a friend, Dr. Chase Cunningham, Dr. ZeroTrust, has a program called Buy the Breach, and it's doing amazing. It's like 20-some% ahead. Once a company gets breached, he's been buying it and encouraging people to go buy it. Excuse me, because it's amazing how those companies are recovering on their stock performance. Clearly, there's not a correlation, which is, again, a pretty big indication that we have a problem in cybersecurity and the, awareness and the priority that companies are making. So that's another issue. But in the SMB space, it can halt your business completely. You lose confidence, customer trust, the PR nightmare, the financial, blow, even having to pay for the ransomware. So yeah, it's serious. And so leadership needs to understand it in terms of financial, terms as well. Put it right down into the terms they care about, right? The business exists to make money. What is the threat and the risk of it not making money? Well, cyber is probably one of your top risks. So anyway, that's kind of the idea. Accountability is another thing, culture of continuous improvement and accountability. That's important to get people to buy in as a security leader, both upstream and downstream. And then, of course, I'm a big fan of repeatable processes, as you might imagine. But not heroics or, this idea of tribal knowledge. We've got it covered. We actually care about being good to our future selves. We actually document the things we're doing. We actually follow the processes we're doing. And there's always a balance, right? Too much, overhead of process can inhibit work production and workflow and output. So you got to do that right, about the appropriate amount of controls based on what you're dealing with. So yeah, those are ideas. Yeah.
One of the things that has helped me in my approach and mindset for because I've been like a pendulum, I'll be honest with you, where I swing one way where I want to put too much process in place and too much policy, and then I swing back the other way where I don't have enough, and I go back and forth. But I think one of the things that's really helped me is some of the Agile manifesto principles when it comes to like Scrum and having processes, but understanding that people come above processes and figuring out that kind of path in the middle, I think has always been like the thing that has helped me the most, because it's really easy, especially if you've been a victim of a breach or something, or some type of major cyber event, to overdo it and basically like handcuff your entire team from doing any work without going through approvals and process, and then you find out that we're moving way too slow now, and having to get back in that balance. How do you advise people when they get in that rut, I guess?
So, basically, how do they get the balance between what's the
Yeah.
appropriate amount of?
Yeah. How do you get that balance of knowing that it's, I don't know, enough?
Well, I think some of it, I mean, not to oversimplify, but like a lot of the things that we talk about in terms of the, ITIL processes is you're reading more the descriptive and not the prescriptive. And that's what VisibleOps really is about, is getting more to prescription. How do we actually do these things in kind of in coordination with kind of a process framework and following methodologies that are proven and best practices. I think that's part of it, right? Is really looking at the best practices and saying, okay, you do some basic analysis as you go through those. And so you're looking outside yourself to kind of managing by fact and not by belief. I think that's where it starts. So a lot of people would just discount, right? And it's human nature. It's like, well, our shop runs this way. That's not really important that we have, backups of our, releases, unless they're major releases. We don't care about minor releases, whatever it might be, right? And so we kind of develop this kind of dismissive culture based upon the fact that we think we know best because we've always done it that way. And I think, one of the things we have to face, and if you're in IT, there's a little bit becoming this idea, and this has become a little bit of an issue in the industry, I think, I see it a lot, is we have to learn how to one of the big issues for the next generations is to unlearn what we've known in the past and then relearn. But I would point that out to going to the frameworks and saying, okay, it describes these kinds of processes are in place. Which ones of these really do matter in our company, our organization, whether that's production or development? Which ones should we really care about? And think about it through a risk lens and think about it through a production lens. And is that worth it? Is the juice worth the squeeze? It's an evaluation, but the point that I'm bringing up is the fact that even take the time to take a deep breath, look outside yourself, find a best practice framework. Agile is awesome. Which parts of those make sense for us and which doesn't make sense? And really engage a team and opinions that are beyond yourself. So assumptions aren't made. It's the assumptions are what usually kick everybody in the butt. So that's the kind of idea that I would say is to find the appropriate amount, is to look outside yourself, look into the frameworks that are best practices have proven, and then decide from there through a risk lens and a production output lens, which of these make sense for us to follow and which ones aren't maybe as critical or important for us to follow.
So tell me where the framework, it's total control comes in.
So that's on IP services in my, MSSP business. We've kind of over the years evolved, as I've shared in this podcast, coming from the VisibleOps and really what are best practices and following some foundational ones in the service support. So we've taken that and married it to, kind of the ITIL processes, married to a variety of other things that we do and how we operate. And so we've developed kind of a total control, which really becomes this quality control system for IT and for security. And it, again, we can look at other sectors, right? Manufacturing, we have the Deming wheel, the godfather of QA processes, a lot of stuff. So some of it came from that kind of influence. Actually, there's a book called The Goal. I don't know if you've ever read that or if it was a bestseller, really good. Dr. Eli Goldratt is the one that wrote that, and it was in a novel form. So it was kind of this really interesting approach to explaining process management and particularly manufacturing is what that book's about. But one of the core concepts there of the goal, what he was talking about is really, he talks about what we call the theory of constraints. And so looking at an organization and saying, usually there's one or two things, and that's not what we think it is, that ends up being the significant constraint. Matter of fact, Kevin Bear, my ex-CTO, went on with Gene Kim to write a book called The Phoenix Project.
Oh, yes. I love that book. That's definitely one of my favorites. Okay. Yeah. Phoenix Project and a follow-up to that. What is it called? Oh, what's the
I'm
song?
sorry, forgetting it too. Yeah. If you look at that book, you'll see Kevin Bear and Gene Kim. So those are some of the original authors of the VisbleOps Handbook. So there's a direct connection there. And Kevin was my CTO. Anyway,
Unicorn Project. That's it.
Unicorn. Yes, thank you.
Yeah,
Yes.
those are two of my favorite books. I've gifted them to managers and directors that report to me for many years. Yeah.
Yeah. So those are kind of both based on this theory of constraints concept, the idea. So anyway, so we've actually incorporated some of that into our total control system. So it starts with, good foundational ITIL driven processes married to VisibleOps processes, which is kind of our own iteration of how we apply those and how we use those. And we build that out into our IT service management system. So we use a fully ITIL compliant ITM system. And then we, of course, look at, kind of the various constraints as we manage things ongoing or we do or roll projects and putting a certain thing. Ultimately, and there's a few other things we do. Ultimately, those core 7 or 8 things that will be put, when I think it's about 10 things, it's really in the core of our total control system that really is designed to deliver quality in IT. Like QA processes in manufacturing. When we deliver that, Toyota Catra, that kind of, we put the car on the manufacturing floor, they perfected it, it's fast, it's got great throughput, but we also know the quality's there. That's what the really important, right? Are we putting out a quality product? And ultimately that's tied to, some of the more important KPIs in our world. Like in cyber, of course, we care a lot about MTTD, right? Mean time to detect. We want to be right on top of that as fast and as short a time as we possibly can. But then also MTTR, mean time to respond. That's super important because detecting it's one thing, but blocking it, eradicating it, whatever, triaging it, that's another thing. So
Right.
that's how total control works in our IP services world.
Yeah. Okay. That makes perfect sense. And yeah, it's a small world that the authors of the Phoenix Project kind of helped you with your book too. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Um, uh, so when it comes to things that are changing today, we know we've talked a lot about AI, probably too much on the show already, and in my other previous episodes. But one of the things that I'm curious about is your take on how AI is helping with cybersecurity and maybe also hurting.
John, hello?
Yeah, I lost it there for just a second, but I think you're back.
Yeah, sorry, I lost you too. I'm sorry. We'll pick it back up. Can you repeat that question?
Yeah, I was just curious of like, how do you think AI is helping with cybersecurity and maybe also hurting?
Yeah, excellent question. And obviously a buzz, right? That's the
Yeah,
purpose of our buzz
100%.
is AI is, such a buzz. And I'll be honest, my head is not in the sand about AI, but there is a little bit of roll the eyes. I got to be
Mhm.
honest about that. Like, the hype around stuff that goes crazy. And yet, no head in the sand here, right? AI is real and it's happening and it's changing things, no doubt. But it's kind of back to the old antivirus days. That's kind of the world we live in. So, new virus comes out to infect things before it becomes wildly, prolific. It's captured by some of the, big and brightest companies. Maybe Semantic Antivirus is one of the first bigger ones with the big engines that are listening to all the malware out there. And of course, they quickly, on the fly create code to block it. And then, of course, a new, workaround, a new malware comes out, and you got a background sync going on, streaming going on of updating signatures as those are discovered. I think AI is a lot like that. I think that's how it kind of plays out, right? We have the good guys and the bad guys. AI is going to do some amazing things. It's going to impact productivity, the whole thing. But of course, the threat actors are going to use it in bigger and bigger ways. And a lot of challenges around AI on many thing that is good information. You can't assume just because it's AI, it's right. It's not a lot of times. It hallucinates. You got to be careful of that. It makes assumptions. You got to be careful of that. And I'm talking about generative AI. The other type of AI where we're taking very specific, smaller, not LLMs, but we're taking very customized language models. I think that's, where the game changer really happens and is going to really impact work and productivity. And to some degree, certain positions will be adjusted and changed. I don't believe that it's going to do away with the workforce like people predict, that kind of thing. But in terms of cyber specifically, I think that the bigger threat is quantum computing. quite frankly.
Because of encryption.
Yep, because of encryption. And, we all know that it used to take years to break 256-bit DES encryption. Quantum computing will do it in days. That's a big threat. Luckily or fortunately, there are just a handful. I think the government needs to invest in this a little bit almost to get ahead of it because it's that critical to our infrastructure and our systems and our banking and all that. But we need, to make sure we've got great, strong defenses against the next generation of quantum computing that comes out, and having that, those algorithms that can block it and stop it. There's some pretty cool stuff out there. Anyway, that's a bigger threat. But the AI piece, yeah, I think it's important to be careful. Who's using AI in your network? How are they using it? What is it doing? Right there. So governance of it. There are a couple of up and coming companies. One of them that we actually work with a little bit that's doing some pretty cool stuff. It'll actually put a rating score of what AI is on your network and how it's being used and what the threat. You can govern or shut it down, or it'll do a bunch of cool things in terms of governing how AI is being used amongst your workforce and on your network.
So let's shift gears a little bit because you mentioned quantum computing, and that's not a topic that we talk a lot about on the show, but it's definitely something that I'm more curious about, and I'm getting more and more curious about it. When it comes to quantum computing, I keep hearing that we're several years away, but it feels like that goal line keeps getting pushed. What is the reasons for that, and how far away are we really?
Well, I think one of the issues is that there's issues with scaling, quantum computing right now. It's, these, qubits, if you will, right? And I think, and I don't want to, I'm not an expert in quantum computing. I generally understand the concepts maybe a little deeper than some, but, the idea is that it multi-threads in almost like the facets of a diamond, right? It can create, multi-threads beyond, and they call it qubits, right? So it's just exponential processing power. It's crazy, right? It's amazing what it can do. It can solve things in minutes, from the classic computers that take millennia to solve. But the idea, there is that I think post-quantum, cryptography, which I talk about in my book a little bit, NIST, the National Institute of Standards, is actually starting to address this. They're coming out with some methods around that, some standards around that, which we're going to need to advance quickly, and stuff that can really understand how quantum, the applications of quantum computing is all the way from eavesdropping to, attacking specialized infrastructure, the things they can recognize in patterns, breaking cryptography. I could go on, and it really becomes geopolitical. I mean, the cyber, implications are pretty huge, right? Shutting down countries or critical systems in countries and whatever. So it's a pretty big deal. But again, the post-quantum cryptography will actually be able to lock it down. It won't recognize it. It'll be blocked. And I think that's a pretty big thing. The advancement of it, again, scaling it is hard. It's very expensive.
Doesn't it have to say like super cold, like near absolute zero or something like that?
Yeah, exactly. And so it's very hard to scale right now. It will change. And when the bad actors can start to get a hold of it. But at the same time, I was reading something about some new little almost like laptop that's a quantum laptop. And this is maybe a buzz, and I maybe don't even know enough about it to bring it up, but I heard a blip on it or something, and I was pretty freaked out. Like, okay, they're going to have a quantum laptop out that actually is going to run at, so there'll be a stuff that's kind of hybrid. We're going to see a whole and we're seeing a little bit of that now with how much demand AI needs for, processing power and database throughput, so they're coming out with, the GPUs and the, different ways to process data. So you're going to see I think a whole iteration of kind of this, amalgamation of these technologies, and they'll end up, having iterations before we get to more pure quantum, computers that are readily available. They exist today, don't get me wrong, but they're the really high performing ones that do some of the stuff we keep talking about. Those aren't out there in any kind of mass at all, any kind of real production.
Yeah. I think it's definitely something that's going to be a game changer whenever it becomes available for for mass consumption. And I wonder what's going to happen. Like, is HTTPS just not going to be relevant anymore? Because everything's going to have to be. I don't know. I just don't know what the encryption algorithms are going to be able to truly protect, or if there's just going to be new ones, like, we're just getting to the next level.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're going to see new I think there are going to be some integration that goes on that we can't really, I don't know if I really understand, particularly I've read a little bit about it, but different iterations or integration with current traditional technologies that are actually going to be tied to kind of new tactics, if you will, or new technologies that will actually block that's again the PQC idea, right? This idea that we're using post-quantum cryptography. So there'll be replacement, upgrade, update stuff to protect you and keep you. And again, we'll be back into a little bit like we're talking about AI. I think we're going to go into a season where we're going to have a little bit of, they got a new quantum thing that's starting to hit mass. Oh, we got to upgrade these things. There'll be a little bit of a back and forth in order to be able to stay safe and stay secure. It's a real problem. I again don't pretend to have it. I mean, I'm glad that we got some good guys. IBM, Rigetti, we got D-Wave. There's a bunch of, quantum computing companies out there that are, very centric to our country, quite frankly, from the geopolitical implications and the geo impact. But there's some cool stuff going on. I know Microsoft's working on some stuff too, of course, and Google, all the big guys are. But anyway, it's the future. I don't know that I understand it completely, but enough to know that it is a threat, no question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of those things we just got to keep an eye on over the next few years and see where it lands out. Scott, it's been a great conversation. I really appreciate you coming on the show and enlightening us on some of the new things that are going on with cyber, as well as talking about your book. How can people pick up a copy of it or connect with you online if they have questions or to learn more about the things that you're working on?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me on the show. It's awesome. Yeah, here's we wrap up. I mean, if you're, a business executive, an IT person, and whatever you want, I actually want to give you guys for a special, kind of gift almost, if you will. I have my digital copy of the VisibleOps Executive Companion Guide. It's kind of a non-technical roadmap for leadership. Normally sells for $17.95 on Amazon. VisibleOps Executive Companion Guide. And if you text me at a number I'll give you in a little bit, I would be happy to give you an e-copy of that book. I'd shoot it over to you. I will also offer up, because your crowd is technical, I don't normally do this, the regular VisibleOps Cybersecurity Book. It's 405 pages of pure fun. You want to curl up by the fire and crack a book on cybersecurity. But I'm happy to share that book for your audience that would understand it more technically. An e-copy, if you get a hold of me, that sells on Amazon as well right now. So those both can be found there. But here's something I'd also like to offer up, is that a lot of people don't know where they're at, whether you're in IT or maybe you're being told by your MSP, MSSP, or maybe you're an executive and you're told by your IT team you're good. We have a special partnership. It's a third party, a complete third party. We pay for it, and we get a certain amount of penetration tests that we can deploy. I would offer up to your audience that if they'd like to pen test their network, it's a level 1 pen test, but you can Google it. Even a basic pen test at this level are $2,000, $3,000, $5,000. You can Google that number. I'm not making it up. I'm actually going to offer up, if you qualify, and there are a couple qualifiers, but a pen test. If you text me, my team will not only get you the e-copy of the book, tell if you want the Executive Companion Guide, or let us know if you want the regular VisibleOps Cybersecurity Edition. And if you're interested in the pen test, note that too, and we will get in touch. Text the word SECURE25, and here's the numbers: 541-359-1269. Text SECURE25, note in there, pen test, note in there, the book, 541-359-1269. And my team will get a hold of you. They'll collect some information, your email address, to be able to get the copies out to you, and then get you scheduled to talk to somebody about a potential no-cost pen test. Happy to do that.
Awesome. I think that sounds great. And I really appreciate you offering that to our audience. That's fantastic, Scott. Thank you so much. And again, thanks very much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thanks again. Really enjoyed being here today, John. Thanks for the great Geek Leader podcast you're doing. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Hope you enjoyed the show. Please go to geekleader.com to learn more about what this guest is up to. Click on their links and connect with them online. I would also greatly appreciate it if you could leave me a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the show. Make sure you've subscribed if you haven't already. And if you feel so inclined, you can leave me a tip by going to geekleader.com/tip.